In our assessment of risk, we also want to talk about uncertainty and stakeholder involvement. And in this context, we want to think about risk perception and the role that uncertainty plays in that, as it's related to also involving stakeholders. So we're going to talk about stakeholders and talk about how to hear the voice of those stakeholders as we're making decisions and as we're planning our new venture. So entrepreneurial opportunities are often defined by considerable risk and uncertainty. Are electric vehicles really going to take hold? Are mobile devices going to be the ultimate way that we communicate and use computers? Is alternative sources of energy, the wind turbines and the solar panels, something that is going to be a reality at a mass market scale? And when we think about these elements, entrepreneurs differ from corporate managers and how they have to make these decisions. We do analysis, but there's a bit more intuition. We get the views of others, but we still need to make individualistic decisions. We need to have that tolerance for ambiguity. We need to have confidence in our skills and knowledge and expertise. And when we look at opportunities, we want to recognize that understanding how entrepreneurs make informed decisions is in part informed by how we view risk and the perceived uncertainty and the perceived risk. Now, what we mean by perceived is what we think versus what the reality may in fact be. The reality we'll call the objective risk. So perceived is the belief. The objective is the reality. And perceived risk often drive entrepreneurs and drive entrepreneurial decisions because we are working to make decisions now on something that is going to become a reality, we hope, in the future. So when we look at the success of new ventures, we want to think about the choices that we make. They're fast changing. It's a demand for interpreting information quickly and diagnosing strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. It's an element of working with incomplete information and being comfortable with that and making decisions in the face of uncertainty. So when we look at such a question of, well, is launching a startup in the alternative energy market a good idea? Well, we can't answer that yet. Alternative energy can mean a lot of things. It can mean wind. It can mean sun. It can mean water or other resources. We can look at data and we can see information on wind energy and electric vehicles. We can look at elements that are tied to pollution-free sources of electricity. We can look at the onset of solar in the US and abroad. We can look at plastic bag use. We can look at independency from fossil fuels. So we can collect data, and we can collect lots of data as entrepreneurs if alternative energy is something that we're interested in. But there's a question again of what do we do with it? Well, we can do lots of things. We can look at home automation. We can look at improving the efficiencies of homes. Do we want to build hardware devices, software devices, add-ons, original equipment? Different companies are doing a variety of different things in this space. It's a big space with a lot of uncertainty. We could pick a subset of that. Suppose we've elected to answer the question of is an alternative energy venture a good idea, and we want to focus on the home, and we want to focus on solar, and we want to focus on solar panels. Well, that's a market. It's still a relatively expensive market that we have to do the math on to see, is this something that we'd like to engage in? Would we like to participate in some fashion? And if not solar, then might it be wind? And what's the future of that? And is there an opportunity there for us? Is it not wind, but is it what you see on the upper right-hand corner of tankless water heaters? Instead of keeping 50 gallons of water hot all the time, let's get hot water when we need it and only when we need it, on demand, as we are taking a shower, as we are washing clothes, as we're using a dishwasher, whatever it is we may do that we need hot water. Let's not incur the energy cost of keeping it hot 24/7. Let's incur that energy cost only when we need it. So a variety of different ways that can make your head spin as far as where do you go and what do you do. But the context of it is we want to recognize how to mitigate that risk and do our homework and do our research, understand what's out there, understand how we can be differentiated, understand what competitors are doing, and how we can be sustainably competitive thereafter. Intuition from your past experiences will play a role, and this is another reason to think about new ventures that you can create that leverage your experience, that bring to bear some knowledge that you've experienced on your own, rather than having expertise in one area and trying to do a startup in a completely different area for which you have no experience advantage. This individualistic view is helpful in that it's complemented by your team, but it still puts you in the driver's seat of being comfortable with making the ultimate decision. The high tolerance for ambiguity, again, valuable for making difficult choices with imperfect information. And confidence. Confidence in your skills and your knowledge and your expertise. Now, stakeholders play a big role. Stakeholders can be a variety of things. It's essentially anybody who has an impact or effect or is affected by your venture and your activities. Customers, perhaps the number one thing you would think of, might be suppliers, investors, and others. We want to hear from them, and we want to hear from them early, and we want to understand what's their experience, their desires, their wants, what do they not want, and we want to learn that information as early as possible. We want to have more awareness of what their needs are, and we want to reduce our uncertainty by hearing their voice early. Now, who to focus on? Well, with limited resources, it's difficult to do everything. But we want to select stakeholders that are representative, that have some measure of power or legitimacy or urgency. We want to hear them via interviews. We want to talk with them face to face. We may want to do some focus groups. We may want to do some surveys. There are a variety of mechanisms that you can use, including some online tools and some free tools to do some of this as well. So be sure when you're doing this to think about the impact of risk perception and uncertainty, to get some valuable input from your stakeholders, and to manage risk. Think about these assets that we've talked about that you can develop internally that are informed by the stakeholder interviews and focus groups and surveys that you may do. So in summary, by understanding these components of entrepreneurial behavior, you can understand where you are. You can understand your own elements of how high are the risks that you're willing to take. What are the rewards and the consequences? And what elements of the decision can you integrate to include hearing the voice of the customer and the voice of the stakeholder very early in the planning of your venture?